The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Host the ultimate backyard barbecue with Whole Foods Market. It's the Hot Grill Summer event through July 16th with sizzling sales on no antibiotics ever boneless beef ribeye steak and beef New York strip steak. Plus, check out sales on sustainable wild-caught Alaska sockeye salmon, organic strawberries, and more. In a hurry? Choose grab-and-go favorites like picnic salads and sushi, plus plenty of cooler-friendly beverages. Make it a hot grill summer at Whole Foods Market.
Kia ora tātou, this is Toby Manhire with a special pop-up episode of Gone by Lunchtime. Normal service will resume next week with Annabelle Lee Mather and Ben Thomas. About 3 weeks ago, early in October, Raf Manji came into the studio to talk about his new role as the leader of the Opportunities Party, or TOP. You'll remember, of course, that the party began in, I think it was 2016, with Gareth Morgan as the leader, and then subsequently Jeff Simmons took over. So Raf Manji is the third leader, and he announced recently a tax policy, tax being the talk of the town lately as we get into election mode, which included some interesting, sweeping new proposals based on a land value tax and getting rid of tax in the lower bracket. Anyway, we talked about that a bit. We talked about his strategy for the party, whether this is the last chance saloon for a party or as it goes into its third election, and his plans to stand in Ilam, where he stood as an independent in 2017, coming second to Jerry Brownlee, beating the Labour candidate. You might also remember him for his involvement in the Labour Council. He was a two-term councillor there and an important part of the Christchurch post-quake rebuild. Anyway, good chat. Enjoy it. We talked about all those things and, of course, touched on cats. A big thanks to spin-off members who keep the wheels turning in here, and to Te Aihe Butler, the producer extraordinaire of Gone by Lunchtime. Kia ora, Raf Manji. Thanks for coming in.
Kia ora, Toby. Thanks for having me.
A lot of people will know you from your days as a councillor in Christchurch. But in February this year, I think I have it right, you began taking on the mantle of leader of the Opportunities Party, aka TOP. Was it February?
End of January, I think.
All right, close enough.
To be exact, close, but yes. I probably started in February, yes.
How did that work? Was there a courtship from them, or did you have to, were you elected leader? How did that work?
Well, I mean, I was appointed by the board, essentially. But yes, I'd had a conversation with Jeff Simmons, who'd been the previous leader, saying that TOP was looking for a new leader. And since Jeff had stepped down, there was a sort of a stand-in leader, Shai Navon, and Shai was about to have a baby, so they were thinking, we need to fill this position. And I had a few conversations with them, and I had been asked to stand for TOP in 2017 in Ilam, and I'd sort of said, look, what I'm doing in Ilam is quite specific, and yes, it looked very odd to people from outside of Christchurch, but it was very,
This is when you stood as an independent.
Yes, it was all about the earthquake. It was all about the funding gap that needed to be filled, such as the money for the stadium, which I ended up getting, even though it took a long time to be deployed. And so I didn't want to I didn't want it to be tainted by any kind of political stuff. But I'd kept in touch with them. The policies, clearly, I was very supportive of. And, Jeff had a chat with me, and then I spoke to Shai and the rest of the board, and then thought about it, because I knew this was quite a challenging task. And I, in a way, stepped away from politics, even though people kept thinking, what are you going to do politically? And I was saying, I'm not doing anything, actually. I'm thinking about the next phase of my life, and I was actually had prepared a PhD proposal on citizenship in the 21st century. And I was doing some research in that area. And it's something I've been quite interested in for a while because I think it's going to be a big issue for us in the future. The whole concept of a social contract. What does that look like? And but I just felt that the timing where we were in, let's say, the long-term economic cycles, political cycles, social cycles, that the next election was going to be a little bit different. And that if a party like the Opportunities Party was ever going to have an impact or make it into Parliament, this was the time that it would happen. And I thought, okay, let's do it. Let's have a go.
What makes you think this one is going to be different? I mean, looking at the way that the party groupings are organised at the moment, in some ways it appears quite a simple option for voters, insofar as you choose whether you want coffee or tea, one of the two, and then how many cubes of sugar do you want in it, right? With the on one side act to make the right party more to the right, and Greens to make theirs more to the left, Labour more to the left. Now that's a very, very generalised, broad approach. But what is the gap there for Top?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually that's a very accurate description. And when I was talking about, the electoral strategy to the team, say 6 months ago, I said, for us to succeed, we actually need the two blocks to be in balance. And they've come back into balance. Okay. So that's actually good. Now, you might think that's kind of actually counterintuitive, but then you go to the next stage where actually people then look and go, yeah, it's coffee or tea. Actually, maybe I'd like something different. Maybe I'd like a cheer drink.
Kombucha.
Yeah, a chia seeds, or just some iced water with lemon. Yeah. So what I'm finding and what people are saying to me is actually we'd like something different. Now, if there was a much more kind of chaotic, polling structure at the moment, people might be not thinking that. But at the moment, it's congealed. I mean, actually, when you look at the polling over the last 6 months, it hasn't really changed that much in terms of the two blocks. So if we get to the point where it's kind of 45 each, give or take, something needs to break that deadlock. But it's also people want something else. So the problem for, say, the Greens or ACT is, yes, their votes might go up. But if they're coming from National Labour, it doesn't change. It might say, oh, we'll get an extra cabinet minister, for example, but it doesn't change what's being offered to the population. So in a way, MMP is sort of congealed, and we're offering something new, and I think that actually helps us.
And so the position of the Opportunities Party remains as it has, if I'm right, from day one, that negotiations are an option with either party, and that there would be no, which I'm thinking presumably implicitly then rules out any accommodation in an electorate seat.
Well, those are two different issues. I think in terms of how we're approaching, let's say, post-election structures, we're very clear we're not going to go into government with either, potential block. We will sit on the crossbenches. We will, if we're in a position, have some kind of very basic confidence and supply agreement. So
no ministerial positions?
No, I mean, I can rule that out right now. And for a very obvious point, if we come in, forget about the current polling. I mean, the last Roy Morgan a few nights ago, I think, was 2.5%. So call it 3 MPs. Maybe if things really take off and it looks like I might win Ilam, maybe that helps the party vote. Maybe we have 5. We're still a new party in Parliament. We've got to get our feet under the desk, and we really want to focus on the particular policy areas that we're interested in. And I think, ministerial positions are just a distraction. You've seen it with the Green Party, the issues it's caused within the party. Even though I think James has done a fabulous job as Minister of Climate Change. And I think even New Zealand First, they came in with all this fire and brimstone in 2017, and you read the speeches Winston gave back then, it was like, everything's going to change. And then it didn't. If you look at his speeches, his early speeches, it was like, end of neoliberalism, we're going to kind of reform things, and you'd have thought capital gains tax would have been out, straight out, and everything just died. And I think a lot of that is to do with becoming ministers and being distracted. So we don't want any distractions at all. So we won't be getting involved in that.
But it's an unusual pitch, isn't it? Vote for us for our party. We want to affect change, but we don't want to be in government.
Yeah, because we'll affect change through the ability to input into legislation and vote for legislation in Parliament. And if our vote is needed, that's going to be quite a powerful position. We will be in a position to influence the budget, and through the budget is where we will actually demonstrate where our kind of policy interests lie.
So the likelihood would be, just to be clear on this, a confidence and supply agreement in which you ensured the stability of a government over a certain period of time in return for a few policy points, and we'll get to some of those in a minute, and then vote on a bill-by-bill basis from the crossbenches.
Yeah. And of course, there'll be some bills where we have quite strong interest in, and some where perhaps we don't. We won't have the numbers of people. So I think we've got to be realistic about. I'm very focused on what can we deliver. Having been in council for 6 years in that post-earthquake environment, knowing how hard it is to deliver things and the pitfalls to fall, the things you can really get tied up in for a very, very long time. We're really outcomes focused, and that's going to be where we put our energy into. And I think yes, you're not going to have budgets, but you can gain, for example, access to policy documents and officials when you're discussing particular policy areas. A bit like Jeanette did, I think, when she had the role around insulation.
Jeanette Fitzsimons.
Yes. So they had a confidence supply agreement with the national government, where she was allowed quite a lot of access around that particular issue. So I think that's our focus. Second term, different story. We might be in a different position. But I think it's just good to get this stuff right out there now.
You talk about Christchurch. You have some name recognition and reputation there, both in terms of your time post-earthquake on council and also in your involvement in the response after the mosque attacks. Ilam as a focus. You've stood there before, 2017. You did all right. Remind me, what did you get?
I got just 23.5% of the vote, 8,300 votes.
Not shabby. How much of the strategy going into the selection rests on that Ilam seat? We know how hard it is for parties that aren't either, that are new parties that aren't splintered off another one. I don't think it's ever happened that they've ever gotten to any.
No, it hasn't happened.
So does that mean that you are betting the house on your on the Ilam constituency for using the coattail mechanism, as it's called?
Yeah, yes and no. It works two ways. Yes, we've thought a lot about Ilam over the last 6 months. We've looked at the numbers. We think we can win it, and that's primarily because Jerry is not running.
Right,
and also Jerry's potential successor, Sam McDonald, who's a city councillor, is also not running. So National will have a completely new candidate there who probably won't, certainly from the people I've heard, have a history of representation in that area, which I think is quite critical. So it means those votes, which were pretty hardwired to Jerry. The reason I was unsuccessful in 2017 is twofold. One, Labour ran against me quite strongly, even though, I spoke to Phil Twyford and said, look, you have a chance of getting rid of Jerry Hill. Why wouldn't you take it? But the tribalism was just too strong for them. So they actually tried to, say, hey, we're going to do well in this seat. So that didn't help. And also, Jerry's votes were much more stickable, for the electorate vote than I expected. Mm-hmm. So even though I did get some votes from National, not enough. We worked out we needed 14,000. But, looking at it now, we think it is definitely possible. A lot of those votes will be probably more amenable to supporting somebody essentially that they know. And I think to be the electorate MP, that's quite critical.
The policy that you laid out on the weekend, I think we're talking, I should say, on Thursday, the 6th of October, and this podcast will probably go out a little bit after that. So just to locate everybody in the moment, you on Sunday laid out, it was the first kind of, it was the first policy package since you became leader of the party, and it was going to the sexiest topic of the moment, thanks to Liz Truss, and then this week we had a much lower deficit than expected, which has prompted another run of discussions around tax. Your proposal, your policy, is a land valuation tax. Tell us about that,
Yeah.
why that's the answer to our woes.
Well, actually, the policy that we proposed, which I think has got a lot of parties in a bit of a pickle, and the PM was struggling to respond to it post-cab when she was asked about it by Bernard Hickey.
This is the income tax part of the tax
so
switch
basically
you're going to talk about.
so we've actually proposed a tax switch. So it's fiscally neutral. That's really the key thing. And the two bits of the switch, and to give you an example that people will be familiar with, in, I think, 2012, National also implemented a tax switch where they cut income tax and they raised GST. And at the time, and it took them a long time to get to that point. They were trying to sort of work out how to pitch it, and eventually they came up with the idea of the tax switch, and they got it through. And that was regarded as slightly regressive in terms of GST does tend to impact people on lower incomes relatively because they spend all of their money. But that was a tax switch. Now, we're proposing to shift the burden of tax again from income, so income tax cuts, and one of the new things we're proposing, which is new for New Zealand, is a tax-free threshold of $15,000, and
so
of course,
up to $15,000,
yes,
the tax rate is zero.
And I know we'll acknowledge the Spin-Off did write about that a couple of weeks ago. Like, I think, import the tax code from Australia.
Yeah.
Now, I had been thinking about it for a bit longer than that, but that was good.
So you claim.
So I claim. Who knows? You never know, do you? I'll go and show my Word document. No, but I mean, that was a good article. And so income tax cuts $6.35 billion approximately. And we also added in a $900 million income support package, which I would like to talk about because it's really critical, because it's the Child Poverty Action Group in work tax credit proposal, and extra funding for people with disabilities and children with disabilities, which I think is really important.
So that leaves you how much that you're missing from the revenue?
Yeah, just over $7 billion.
Okay.
Noting that all these numbers obviously are approximate. Now, so I've talked about a land value tax for the last year, actually for many years. Just to situate it for listeners, a land value tax has been around in New Zealand from 1891 to 1991. And a student helpfully wrote a 300-page PhD dissertation on land value tax in New Zealand from 1891 to 1991. So it has been around. It is being used in Australia in certain ways, and around the world as well. And places like Singapore and Hong Kong have also used them. So essentially it's a tax on the land value of your property. So not the house on top of it, purely the land value.
And people who are homeowners will see that when they get their rates information, those two different sums.
Yeah. And in a way, I mean, New Zealand has an exceptionally strong land valuation system. I mean, you could say New Zealand's always been a land-based
The data
economy.
is there.
The data is there. A lot of reformers in the US who are looking at this. Andy Burnham, Labour Party guy, Mayor of Manchester, has been promoting this as well. Having the data is really critical, because splitting out the valuation differences between what's known as improvements, essentially your house and other buildings, and the bare land can be challenging. We've got all that. So we've got a very good system. So the tax is applied to the residential value of land. We have pitched it at 0.75%. Which we think will raise around just over $7 billion.
Which means, in brass tacks terms, for someone who lives in Auckland, not uncommon, terrifyingly, to be for someone in a house sitting on a bit of land worth $1 million. What does that calculate as an annual tax?
Yeah, I mean, when I look at, that's quite simple. Let's say you have a land value of $1 million.
Yes.
That's $7,500 a year. So it's not a crazy number, but obviously it's extra. But of course, on the other side, and the reason why we call it a rebalancing tax switch, you're getting income tax cuts on the other side. Now, the impact on individuals is going to vary depending on your household structure and the value of your house, value of your land. I mean, essentially anyone on a kind of living in a median value house on a median income or household income is probably going to be better off. So I'd say probably 60% of people will be better off under this. But it's obviously going to depend household to household. for, taking the difficult issue first for people on superannuation who might not be, and remember that is taxed, and for many of them they do get other income.
And they might have bought that house for a tenth of the value of that land.
So, but anyone essentially who is cash challenged can defer that until the property is sold. Now, this was raised with me when I was a councillor in Christchurch, chair of finance, and a lot of people would call me up and say, look, my rates bill is crazy and I don't have the cash to pay for it. And my rates bill is high because my property value is high, which is not entirely true.
It's more to do with proportionate.
Yes, and every year when rates get published, we have the same conversation.
Everyone opens the envelope and screams.
Yeah. So I actually brought in a piece of, what we'd call legislation, but a rule in Christchurch that you could basically defer your rates until you sell your house. Not many people took it up. So I think it's one of those things that...
But it's important, isn't it? Because a capital gains tax, which has proved hugely controversial and has now become untouchable politically.
I think it's probably dead.
The two main parties. It does amount to a tax on an earning. So you make it. I mean, it's there on the side of the tin. Gain. You make a capital gain, and that's taxed. The issue with the LVT is that you're not seeing any money coming in that's being taxed. So it looks like you've chucked a new tax on the homeowner. But you're saying that you can go put that to one side until such point as I sell my house. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, if you're on superannuation.
Only if you're on superannuation.
Yeah. Now, there will be, I'm sure somebody will come up with a scenario where there is somebody on a very low income who happens to own a home. Now, it's very difficult to do that because, as anybody knows, trying to get a mortgage to buy a house is very difficult, and the bank likes to know you have the income to repay the mortgage. But there might be people who, for example, essentially are grandfathered in. Like they've owned a house for a long time, but they don't have a lot of income, but they're not yet retired. So, we'd probably look at something like that. And as I explained to somebody, it's someone said, is this an inheritance tax or an estate tax? I said, well, you could look at it like that, but it's more, you're not paying a capital gains tax. You've never had to pay tax on the gain in the value. Now, remember, the key about the land value tax, and there's oodles of articles and research about it. It's been around for a long time. Henry George popularised it in the 1870s with his book Progress and Poverty, and it has been, it's been in and out of favour. The Liberals pushed it in the sort of early 1900s. David Lloyd George tried to bring it in, and of course the landowners were very powerful there, and they didn't really sort of want to have a bar of it. But essentially what it does is it captures the value that is implicit in land that is there by virtue of public investment. So essentially you have a bare piece of land over here, and you have a piece of land, here with a house on it, and it's got shops and schools and whatever. That is more valuable. And it's more valuable from that land over there because it's got all these amenities around. And those amenities come primarily from public investment. Now, the whole point of the land value capture is reflecting that the increase in the value of the land is down to that public investment. So when people go, but I bought my house and it's earned all this money, it's like, well, actually, you might have built a nice house on it and you've done renovation. Sure, we're not taxing on that. It's the land value aspect that is being taxed. So you could think of it as a tiny annual capital tax, if you looked at it in that respect. But essentially, it is also a big driver in the lack of productive investment, the focus on housing, and essentially the fact that our housing is unaffordable. So when you think about the rebalancing and the tax switch, we're essentially trying to say, okay, incomes to house prices, which have been running we're in Auckland at crazy levels like 12 or 13, need to come down. Now, if we can get that down to 6 or 7, that's going to make housing way more affordable.
You just said you think the capital gains tax is probably dead.
Yeah.
Just just
because it's not that good a tax, to be honest.
But that's not the reason, is it? That's not the reason it's dead. It's dead because it's politically unpalatable, and that the two main parties, the Labour Party, who pushed for it, and we had Phil Goff on this podcast recently saying he still backs it and doesn't regret pushing hard for it, but a decision has been made that it's an electoral suicide. And what is different about this one? Surely the same group of property-owning classes, of people who vote. No one. Everyone votes who is in the group that you're targeting here. So it's a non-starter.
I don't think so. I mean, what I'm surprised about, say, with the membership and the supporter base of the Opportunities Party is, yes, we are attracting more and more younger people, but we actually have quite a lot of older people as well who go. And actually, I was at an event in Ilam a couple of nights ago, and one of our supporters brought along his 28-year-old daughter. And he said, she's living at home. She can't afford to move out. So there is an intergenerational conversation going on here. So quite frankly, anyone aged under 30 should be running down to vote for Top, and just queue up a year in advance to get your vote in, because you're going to be better off. But also, we're going to change the landscape for how living is going to be. And yes, for, let's say, the people who have shares in the bank of mum and dad, who might actually be able to help their kids out. Yeah, they might go, well, yeah, I've got my own family tax. I'm happy to pay that. But actually, that's not good for our social cohesion. That is not a good state for our society to be in. And actually, we'd like to get to the point that we were maybe 30, 40 years ago, where you said to somebody, hey, go to school, study hard, get a job or a degree or whatever, go out into the world. And the sense that if you worked hard, which, people love to use the word hard, but if you worked, you could probably afford to buy a home or rent a home or whatever. That is no longer possible. You can't kind of look your kids in the face and say, oh yeah, just work hard and you should be able to save up $200,000 for deposit. They'd look at you going, huh? And what about my student debt? Huh? So a lot of them are just downing tools and living at home. Or living wherever. So I think this is a big social issue. We have, it's entrenched poverty in certain parts of our society. And I would say to those people who may be, more on the conservative side, or, the property owners who are screaming about crime and all, well, if you want to solve that, you better solve the housing issue.
Host the ultimate backyard barbecue with Whole Foods Market. It's the hot grill summer event through July 16th with sizzling sales on no antibiotics ever boneless beef ribeye steak and beef New York strip steak. Plus, check out sales on sustainable wild-caught Alaska sockeye salmon, organic strawberries, and more. In a hurry? Choose grab-and-go favorites like picnic salads and sushi, plus plenty of cooler-friendly beverages. Make it a hot grill summer at Whole Foods Market.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
Most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Climate Adaptation.
We are the Pōtiki of the Taiao.
And the words of those keeping the home fires burning.
It's more than just going along and planting some trees. You got to be able to defend that place to the end of your life.
We have the solutions. We just need to come back to the belief in ourselves as rangatira.
Join me, Nadine Hura, and Ruia Āpirehama, the Kōpapa Korangi Series 2, Ahi Ka. Brought to you by Te Komata o Te Tonga, the Deep South Challenge, out now on the Spin-Off Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
In the past, TOP has foregrounded, in terms of its wider economic and tax falls into it too, pledge the UBI, this idea of a universal benefit where basically everybody gets it and you need a bigger tax take in order to make that happen. Is that still part of the Opportunities Party's thinking?
Yeah, no, it is. And so when I looked at the overall program we needed to bring in, I thought actually this is going to take some time. So what we're going to do is we're going to split it into 2 phases. Phase 1 is going to be essentially term 1 in Parliament. Phase 2 is going to be term 2. So I said, okay, we want to bring a UBI in by 2029, and this is how we're going to do it. Phase 1 is the tax switch. Phase 2 is a broader tax switch. So in terms of bringing in, obviously, the income tax cuts, bringing in the changes to company tax, to trust tax, closing all the tax loopholes, creating a single flat income tax, probably increasing the range around LVT to apply to all land, because some people said, why is it just residential land? Because that's the problem we're trying to deal with right now. So that is still the goal. But I think we needed to set sort of a clear pathway to get there.
So in the scenario where, let's say, I think it's fair to say if you were to win Ilam, that's obviously a success. You get 3%, you bring in 4 or 5 MPs, that's a success. You're in a position to be in the room. What are the other things? The conversation is, let's be realistic. You want to sit on the crossbenches. You want to provide your confidence and supply. We can give you a couple of things. What are your things? What's your list? What's top of that list?
I think clearly the tax switch is critical. If we don't tax property properly, we're going to have the same problem that we continue to have, which is basically unproductive investment in property. And, when I look at the policy we proposed on the weekend around housing, the $3 billion Community Development Fund, 4 community housing associations, a different approach to how much money you can borrow to invest in residential property. I mean, there's a ton of stuff in there, and it's all about pulling all these levers at once. So that probably is the focus for us. And sure, if one, block came and said, yeah, we'd love to do this, then we'd go, great, we'd love to support that. So I'd say that would be our priority. We will be talking next year, health, education, transport, but also public investment. So I can be quite clear that we do not have any concerns about the level of public debt. Now, if Grant Robertson wants to start, bringing in his new sort of austerity bans around, debt to GDP numbers, we don't care. The debt to GDP number for us is not a big issue. The constraint, obviously, in the economy is inflation, its capacity to deliver. So we'll be talking a lot about long-term plans around infrastructure, how we invest in it, what sort of pipelines we deliver. So, some of those bigger picture investment things. So, again, next year I'll have a bit more to say about how we approach investment in public services. But essentially our approach is, how can we build a better future for the people of New Zealand, and what are the building blocks that we need to put into place? And I just don't see that from Labour or National. It's just, they just pick at each other all the time. And we need something a little bit more aspirational.
This is top 3.0. We remember Gareth Morgan and then Jeff Simmons, who had been his deputy, came in for 2.0. Is this the last shake of the dice, do you think, for the Opportunities Party?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say yes. Though if the threshold gets lowered, and actually I'm seeing the electoral review panel next week in Wellington, and I think the first thing I'll say to them is, have you read the Law Commission report from 2012? Why on earth are you wasting time asking people about this? How low
would you put it?
3%?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it probably should go, but I think just in terms of kind of, due diligence, probably 3% makes sense. Because then I think if you look at the numbers, if we had a 3% threshold now, the Māori Party would be in Parliament, TOP would probably be in Parliament, New Zealand First would be in Parliament. And that's not bad. Then we've got 7 parties and the opportunity for others to appear from time to time.
The Voices for Freedom Party might get it. How's that?
There could be, I can't ever see those particular groups getting themselves together and actually having any kind of coherent policy platform that wouldn't be covered by a New Zealand First or an ACT when push comes to shove. But I think a 3% threshold, you would see also just a different approach, because there is just so much time wasting around that threshold and the idea that you have a wasted vote. And, one Labour MP said to me recently, we like the wasted vote because they all come to us.
So you've obviously talked to Jeff Simmons. He was part of the process that saw you where you are now. Have you talked to Gareth Morgan?
I have had, not in terms of top, no. I did bump into him over the summer, and, we had a chat. How are you going? But we haven't spoken about this, no. I mean, I think, it's Gareth, is a guy with strong views. He did his dash. He tried to take the Morgan Foundation from a think tank into a political party. Did really well. Who knows how things would have been if he'd managed to get on the TV and all the rest of it. But, it is what it is. And I think, he's moved on from that, and that's fine. And, we'll see what we can do. I think it is possible. And I think, obviously, Ilam makes it possible. If you said, can we get 5%, I'd say, that's pretty tough.
There are plenty of ways to skin a cat, aren't there? Which brings me to the obvious question. Do you have a position on cats?
Yes, I love cats. I'd say I'm more of a cat guy than a dog guy, to be fair. But, I love cats.
That's really not going to play well with the base.
I love cats. I do, unfortunately, suffer from an allergic reaction to cats, so I don't have one at home, but I've got a neighbour who's got a cat who I sort of talk to occasionally.
Hey, before I let you go, you and I, just purely by chance, were at the same breakfast this morning, an event hosted by the Auckland Business Chamber with Simon Bridges interviewing Jaishankar, the foreign minister for India, the first trip by a foreign minister from India for many decades. What did you make of that? And your father was born in India and then migrated to the UK. So what is your sort of involvement with the Indian diaspora?
I'm quite involved. I was on the board of the Asian New Zealand Foundation for 3.5 years, and very involved with a couple of local Indian organisations like the Business Council. And, a big supporter of particularly the young professional, Kiwi Indian diaspora. They do great things. They don't have a political home. They don't think they get a lot of attention. There's a huge amount of innovation and energy and enterprise there. There's a sense that New Zealand's going a bit backwards in its relation to India. The way immigration treated a lot of people over COVID has really left a scar. But it's a great opportunity for New Zealand. I think the minister coming is great. He said some interesting things about India. It's a more connected, confident country with an advanced place in the world. And I think his messages for New Zealand were pretty clear. Stop worrying about FTAs and focus more on business to business and people to people relationships. And I think, we've had so much focus on China, but actually we should be having a huge focus on India, but not on trade agreements. Just stop talking about dairy and start talking about business. It's an incredible, huge market. And actually what we're going to do with India, I think, is going to be more focused around business, technology, innovation, and that's where we should focus our energy.
Thank you very much, Raf Manji, for coming, and we'll catch up again in election year, I'm sure.
I'm sure we will. Thanks much.
Kia ora, I'm Alex Casey, Senior Writer at The Spin-Off. We wouldn't exist without the ongoing support of our generous members. If you're able to, you can make a donation at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, Podcast Manager at The Spin-Off. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spin-Off member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.